For nearly 2 decades, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were held up as one of Hollywood's rare success stories. An Oscar-winning actress and a Grammy-winning country star who somehow made a marriage work across two demanding industries, constant travel and relentless public attention. So when word broke that the couple had separated, it landed as one of the biggest entertainment stories of the year. And when Kidman finally spoke about it publicly for the first time, months after the divorce was finalized, fans expected answers. What they got instead was something more careful, more guarded, and in its own way more revealing than a tell-all could have been. This is the real story of how that marriage ended, what Kidman has actually said about it, and why so much of the reason behind the split remains something she has chosen to keep to herself. Kidman and Urban married in 2006, in a wedding that instantly became one of the most talked-about events in celebrity news that year. She had already lived through the glare of a high-profile Hollywood marriage and divorce. He was in the middle of a breakout run in country music, known on stage for his energy and offstage, according to people who knew him for being far more private than his performances suggested. They built their life largely in Nashville rather than Los Angeles, a choice friends often said was deliberate, a way to give their two daughters, Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret, something closer to a normal childhood, away from the constant churn of industry events. For years, that arrangement seemed to work. The couple showed up for each other publicly, at premieres and at concerts, and talked in interviews about balancing two careers in two very different worlds. But careers like theirs don't stay still. Kidman's slate only grew busier as she moved deeper into television and film production, taking on projects that kept her on set for months at a stretch. Urban's touring schedule pulled him across the U.S., Canada, and Australia for extended runs. What had once looked like two orbits that reinforced each other slowly became two lives that simply ran in parallel. According to reporting from E! News, the couple privately separated and began living apart at the start of the summer of 2025, well before anything became public. That detail matters because it means that by the time fans were still seeing the two of them appear together, smiling at events, the marriage had already entered its final stage behind the scenes. One of those last public appearances came at a high-profile sporting event in Nashville, where the two were seen interacting normally. Days later, Kidman posted an anniversary tribute to Urban that read, to most people, like an ordinary sign of a stable marriage. Neither moment hinted at what was actually happening. Lawyers on both sides were already working through the outlines of a settlement. There were smaller, stranger moments, too, that fed public speculation before the official announcement. In July, Urban was doing a radio interview in Australia when a host asked him about Kidman's on-screen romantic scenes with a younger co-star. Partway through the question, Urban dropped off the call. A producer on air said his team appeared to have disconnected because they didn't want the interview to continue in that direction. Neither Kidman nor Urban addressed the moment publicly, but it circulated widely online and became one of the early signs, in hindsight, that something in the relationship had shifted. Around the same period, reporting emerged that Kidman had begun the process of applying for residency in Portugal, a process that reportedly requires in-person appointments. Sources described Urban as preparing to do the same at one point, though his touring schedule reportedly made it difficult for him to attend the required appointment in person. None of this was framed publicly as evidence of a marriage ending. It read, if anything, like a family exploring a new home base. Only later did it become part of the broader picture of two people already living increasingly separate lives. Kidman filed for divorce in Nashville in September 2025, listing September 30th as the date of separation and citing irreconcilable differences, language that is common in high-profile filings, but which, in this case, capped years of gradual distance rather than a single rupture. What stood out to observers wasn't the filing itself, but how quickly and calmly it moved afterward. Less than 4 months later, in early January 2026, the former couple submitted a finalized settlement to a Nashville court. A judge signed off on the divorce that same week. In the agreement, Kidman was named the primary residential parent for their two daughters, with Urban receiving regular parenting time, described in court filings as roughly every other weekend. Neither party requested alimony, and child support was set at zero, a detail that suggests both a level of trust between them and, likely, a prenuptial agreement that had already addressed how their considerable individual assets would remain separate. Commentators who cover celebrity legal proceedings pointed to the settlement as unusually smooth for a marriage of that length and public profile. There was no protracted courtroom battle, no dueling statements, no messy public fight over custody. Both Kidman and Urban chose not to appear in person for the final hearing, leaving their attorneys to close out the process. It wasn't until March 2026, in a wide-ranging cover interview with Variety, that Kidman addressed the split publicly for the first time. And what she said was notable less for what it revealed and more for how firmly she drew a line around what she would not discuss. She described the previous year as a period of retreat, saying she had been quiet and dealing with things privately. When asked more directly about the marriage and its end, she kept her answer focused entirely on her daughters and her own forward motion, saying she was grateful for her family and intent on keeping them steady, and that everything beyond that she preferred not to discuss out of respect for the people involved. That is the operative fact at the center of this story. Kidman has spoken about the divorce, but she has not explained why it happened. She has confirmed the timeline, confirmed her state of mind during it, and confirmed that she's choosing privacy over disclosure. She talked about staying rooted in Nashville, noting that after 20 years there, it's simply home to her and her family, divorce or not. She talked about her daughters, now teenagers, in warm and protective terms. But on the specific question of what pulled the marriage apart, she was deliberate about saying nothing at all. Urban, for his part, has not addressed the split publicly in any comparable interview. The radio moment from months earlier remains the closest thing to a public reaction from him, and even though it was an exit from a conversation rather than statement. It's tempting in stories like this to look for a single culprit, an affair, a betrayal, a dramatic falling out. But nothing in the public record supports that kind of explanation here. What the reporting actually shows is a much more ordinary and, in some ways, more relatable story. Two people with enormous, demanding careers that pulled them physically apart for months at a time, year after year, until the distance stopped being something they were managing and became something they were simply living inside. Kidman's slate only grew heavier in exactly the period their marriage was unraveling. She had multiple major projects moving through production and promotion at once. A crime drama series, an ensemble comedy, and a long-awaited sequel to one of her most beloved films. The kind of schedule that keeps an actress on set and on the road for the better part of a year. Urban's touring commitments ran on a similarly demanding cycle, keeping him performing across multiple countries for months at a stretch. Add two teenage daughters navigating school and their own emerging public lives, and the ordinary friction of a two-career household becomes something much harder to sustain. That's not a scandal. It's the story of a lot of marriages that end, celebrity or otherwise, not from betrayal, but from two people slowly living less and less of their lives together until the marriage becomes a formality attached to a life that no longer quite exists. The settlement itself, remarkably free of conflict, seems to reflect that this wasn't two people fighting over what went wrong. It was two people who had already, quietly, agreed on how to move forward separately. Since the divorce was finalized, both Kidman and Urban have kept moving. Kidman has continued promoting an unusually full slate of upcoming work, including a crime drama series, a comedy centered on a woman's financial unraveling, and a sequel to the film that helped define her career in the 1990s. She has spoken about entering this new chapter with an intentional focus on stability for her daughters rather than urgency about her own personal life. Friends close to her have described someone who is using work, as she reportedly always has, as a way of steadying herself through a hard transition rather than as a distraction from it. Urban has continued to tour and, according to some reports, has been weighing whether to expand beyond music into film and television, a shift that would have been notable during the marriage, since he had long described himself as someone who preferred to stay out of the acting world his ex-wife built her career in. Rumors have periodically linked him to other women in the months since the split, including a fellow country artist and a touring musician, but the people named in those rumors have publicly denied any romantic involvement. What's left, more than anything, is a portrait of two people handling the end of a 2-decade marriage with unusual restraint. No war statements. No competing narratives leaked to the press. Just a settlement reached quickly, a shared commitment to their daughters, and a public comment from Kidman that amounts, essentially, to, "I'm doing what's right for my family, and the rest is mine to keep." If you came looking for the moment Nicole Kidman finally reveals the real reason her marriage to Keith Urban ended, that moment hasn't happened. And based on everything she said so far, it may never happen. What she has offered instead is something quieter, an acknowledgement that the past year was hard, a firm boundary around her daughter's privacy, and a clear signal that she's chosen to close this chapter without narrating it for the public. Sometimes that restraint says more than a full confession would. Two people who built a life together for 20 years, who raised 2 children together, and who reached a divorce settlement with almost none of the acrimony that usually accompanies splits of this size, that, on its own, tells you something about how they chose to end things, even if it doesn't tell you exactly why.